is our second Sunday of the month, and so tonight we are going to be looking at some Christian apologetics, and I think you may enjoy this one tonight. It was a beautiful, crisp, sunny day in California desert near the town of Amboy. On this particular February 22nd, 2020, COVID was barely a concern, but Mad Mike Hughes had other things to worry about. A rocket hobbyist who had several altitude records for homemade rockets already under his belt had a plan. In his homemade raccoon, as he called it, because it was a rocket with weather balloons, a raccoon, he planned to soar some 68 miles above the Earth's surface and snap a picture of the Earth's horizon to prove that the Earth was flat. That was not that long ago, about 2 years ago, that this happened. In his autobiography, he said, "I know about aerodynamics and fluid dynamics and how things move through the air, about certain sizes of rocket nozzles and thrust. But that's not science. That's just a formula. There's no difference between science and science fiction. But there is. Science fiction could have written a happier ending to Mike Hughes when his parachutes failed to deploy on that particular flight. And he died in the desert that day. But Mike Hughes was a prominent member of the Flat Earth Society, probably one of its most famous members in the last 5 or 6 years. The Flat Earth Society is a group of conspiracy theorists that reject the reality of NASA's explorations, that believe the moon landings were faked, and deny basic Earth science. Nut jobs? Well, I think most of us would probably say yes. However, they have made headlines and headway into the mainstream of American culture. In 2017, NBA player Kyrie Irving said that he believed the earth was flat. Later, he recanted, saying that maybe there's a possibility that the earth is in fact round, but many believe that it was simply a verbal concession to quiet the jeers and the mocking that he faced in the weeks following his admission. Often flat earthers are associated with Christianity because many believe that the Bible teaches a flat earth. So tonight we're going to ask the question, does the Bible really teach a flat earth? Or we might ask it this way, do the scientific data and the biblical data agree? When we come to the Bible, there's several passages, and we're going to look at quite a few tonight, and there's others we could use. But I've kind of broken them down, I think, into 6 categories. So if you're taking notes, you may want to take these 6. And there's several passages under each one of these. But it seems like when it comes to the biblical data, one of the first things that people look at is the idea of the 4 corners. For example, in Isaiah 11 and verse 12, talking about God bringing the nation back together, he says, "I will raise a signal for the nations and will assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the 4 corners of the earth." We'll see. The Bible says that that the earth is flat because it has 4 corners. It must therefore be a square with 1, 2, 3, 4 corners. The angels, we see the angels coming from the 4 corners in Revelation 7 and verse 1, and also in Revelation 20 and verse 8. And so because the Bible mentions 4 corners, the Bible must teach or believe that the earth is in fact flat. The second category of passages I see in the Bible that people who are of the flat earth persuasion try to use is the fact that it talks about the earth having a foundation. Kind of like a house has a foundation, that there is a foundation, and foundations are for flat things, they would say. And so, for example, in 1 Samuel 2 and verse 8, he says, "For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world." He set the world on these pillars. And so you might draw an artist rendition of this, of some sort of land and water mass or area whether it be square because it has four corners, or maybe rectangular, could have four corners. It couldn't be a pentagonal because that would have five corners. So that would contradict the Bible. And then underneath there are pillars. I don't know if they're fluted. I don't know what kind of capitals they have on them, but they're pillars that are holding up the earth. And so therefore God has set the earth on these things. In fact, he would ask Job the question in Job 38:4, were you there when I laid the foundation of the earth? And so there's a foundation of the earth. And again in Psalm 102 and verse 25 and other passages as well. There are those who see in the Bible how it speaks of the earth's immovability. That indicates to us that the earth must therefore be flat. For example, in 1 Chronicles 16:29 through 30, and by the way, this is one they love to talk about, ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. And then in verse 30, tremble before him all the earth. Yes, the world is established, it shall never be moved. It's sitting on a foundation. Your house doesn't move if it's sitting on a foundation. And so the earth, it's sitting on a foundation, it is not moved. Psalm 75 and verse 3, when the earth totters, all its inhabitants, it is I who keep it, or steady its pillars. I keep it steady. I keep it from moving. It's immovable, we might say. Again, in Psalm 93 and verse 1, Psalm 104 and verse 5, I like this one. He set the earth on its foundation, that it should never be moved. There you have both the idea of the foundation and the immovability of the earth. It doesn't move. So the next category, this I guess would be number 4, would be the idea of the vault or the firmament. So in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 6, God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. The ESV here translates the word expanse. The King James uses the word firmament, which firmament comes from the idea of firm, hard, that is, you can't puncture it, and that this somehow forms a canopy or a dome over the earth in its flatness, whether we're talking about a circular disc of an earth or we're talking about maybe a square of the earth. There's this dome or vault. Some translations say vault, and that's the skies above, we might say. But it certainly sounds like, here is the earth with a firm, not something that is not firm, but is firm. Not gas or fluid that you're moving through, but the idea is if you went high enough, you would hit a barrier, a solid, physical, firm barrier. And that must be what Genesis 1:6 is talking about. In Isaiah 40 and verse 22, another passage that often gets used in this discussion, it is he, talking about God and his majesty, Isaiah 40, who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. And so the idea is that God is somehow sitting maybe on top of or in the midst of the firmament. Maybe his throne is dangling down just a little bit, so he's in our atmosphere or in our world, but he's attached to this firmament, and he's sitting above the circle of the earth. And most flat earthers, by the way, believe in a circular disc that's flat. And so this fits right in with their idea that the earth is flat and it's a circle of the earth. In Job 37 and verse 18, can you, like him, spread out the skies hard as a metal or cast metal mirror? Talking about this expanse, and the question is asked of Job: can you beat out? And that's the idea. The word "spread out" here in the ESV is really the word for beating. Can you beat out a sheet of metal into a dome like God has and placed it over the earth? See, the earth must therefore be flat. Proverbs 8 and verse 27, another passage that talks about this firmament in the sky. Number 5, there are categories in which it appears the earth is the center of the universe. Now, theologically, I believe the earth is the center of the universe. I saw a meme the other day where an atheist was trying to mock Christianity. And he was talking about how there are billions of stars out there, each including probably its own solar system. And in those solar systems could be hundreds of planets. And on those planets, they're spread out across the galaxies. There are many, many different galaxies out there. And yet there's only one with humanity that God cares about. And all the Christians are saying, yeah, that's why we're so special. That is not a mockery of Christianity. That is an elevation of humanity. So yes, I believe theologically we are the center of the universe. But that's not what these verses are talking about when we're talking about geocentricity. We're talking about the idea that everything physically in the universe rotates or moves around the earth. By the way, there is, besides the Flat Earth Society, there are those who believe in a spherical earth but also believe in geocentricity, that everything still revolves around the earth. Both, you might say, I guess, are a little crazy, but I digress. There are passages, for example, in Joshua 10 and verse 12, when they are fighting near the valley of Ajalon, and in order to allow the nation of Israel to be victorious, God extends the day. And so he tells Joshua, he says, the sun to stand still at Gibeon and the moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still and the moon stopped. You see, the earth is there. The sun is moving around the earth, and the moon is moving around the earth. And God said, told them to stop, and so they stopped. But the earth cannot be moved, and so obviously it has nothing to do with any geodynamics. It's all about the heavenly, the celestial. They rotate or move around the earth. Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 5 talks about the sun that rises, the sun goes down, hastens to the place where it rises again. And so there's this, the old cartoons where the sun has a face and the moon has a face, and they're coming out over the earth, and then they're going back and they're running back over to the place where they started, so the next day they can rise again, and set again, and then they run back over and they keep doing that. And that's kind of the picture that they believe that Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 5 is setting, or in Psalm 19 verses 4 through 6, the same idea that the sun is the one that is rising, the sun is the one that is setting. And then the last category, there are verses that are used when it talks about like the full visibility of the earth. If the earth is a round ball-like shape, and I'm standing here, it would be impossible for me to see things on this side of the earth. But if the earth is flat, and I'm sitting anywhere on the flatness of the earth, and with a powerful enough telescope, I can see all the earth at one time. And the Bible certainly depicts the idea that the earth can be completely seen. We've already seen, for example, in Isaiah 40 and verse 2, he who sits above the circle of the earth and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. It's that he's watching over the earth. He sees everything. Or in Matthew 4 and verse 8, when the devil takes Jesus during his temptation to the pinnacle of the temple, and it says he showed him all the earth. Well, the earth must be flat, otherwise Jesus couldn't have seen all the earth, right? Or in Job 28 and verse 24, when he says he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. Again, to be able to see everything, the full visibility of the earth, it geometrically must be flat in order to account for that. So what do we do with these verses? We look at them, and maybe you've got an inkling in your mind, that just ain't right, and you would be right. Those aren't right. So how do we deal with people who believe these things? Or on the other side of the spectrum, we'll mention this in a moment, people who think Christians believe these things. Christianity often gets a bad rap of being unscientific, and based upon passages like these. They seem unscientific. They go counter to what we actually observe in our universe. Well, number one, if we're going to address this, we need to address it from the standpoint of genre. What do we mean by genre? Well, genre simply it's talking about literature in its different styles or different types of literature. For example, in the Bible, we are probably most familiar with the historical narrative, that there's a story telling the history of how something happened or how another event happened or how one event happened after another event and so forth. And so there's this history that is given, and it's spoken or written as a narrative or a story. I knew one preacher that hated it when you said, in the story of Noah or in the story of this, because it was like, Bible time for kids because we were telling them stories. Well, the Bible refers to the stories and the narratives, and so there's nothing wrong with using that verse, or using that word in reference to the accounts of the Bible, but certainly historical narrative. But that's not the only kind of genre in the Bible. For example, there's poetry, wisdom literature. There's apocalyptic literature, the book of Revelation. We understand we don't read the book of Revelation like we do the book of Genesis, right? One's a historical narrative, and one is apocalyptic. It's a pretty good key when you come to historical narrative. Take everything literally, unless there's a reason not to. But when you come to apocalyptic, take everything figuratively, unless there's a reason not to. It's the exact opposite. We read them differently. We start with different assumptions or biases about the particular kind of literature. Epistolary, letter writing. Paul wrote a good portion of the New Testament in letters. 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, James, Jude. These are letters, and they're written in letter forms, and so we need to understand those structures as we're reading them. There's didactic literature, which is the idea of teaching. Things are being taught. There are times in the Gospels where Jesus is just teaching. The Sermon on the Mount, for example, in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Didactic, and so it should be read that way. Prophetic literature is going to be read differently than historical narrative. And so looking at the genre of the Bible, it's made up of many different genres, and so we come in and we understand those passages. What's interesting is most of the passages that we looked at, except for maybe one or two, are written are found in poetic sections of the Bible. And the poetic sections of the Bible use imagery to illuminate ideas. According to Dr. Justin Rogers, he says, poetry is to be read differently than prose. It is more expressive, emotional, and metaphorical. In fact, taking biblical poetry literally would, in some cases, pervert clear scriptural teaching elsewhere, leading to the belief that there are many gods instead of one God, from Exodus 15:11 or Psalm 86:8. That humans are really gods, Psalm 82:6. That thunder is the voice of God, 2 Samuel 22:14. And that God slays sea monsters, Psalm 74:12 through 14. That God has wings, Psalm 61 and verse 4. These are visions or imagery that is used in poetry to illustrate a point. We use language like this all the time. We might say of someone, well, he is as blind as a bat. We don't mean that he is a bat. We don't mean when we say he is as blind as a bat that he's winged and furry. We're only making one comparison, vision, right? We don't want to say that, because the bat has extra sensitive hearing, when we say he's blind as a bat, that he also has elevated hearing, because that certainly may not be true. We're only focusing on one trait. And so when Jesus told his disciples to go tell that fox, and he's talking about Herod, we are left to think about the fox. And what is it about the fox that is the same as Herod? Again, I don't think it's because he is quadrupedal and he walks around with fur and yips at the moon. No, it's the idea of being sly as a fox. We even have that saying today. So we have to take them for what they are. They're metaphors of life. And so if an inspired author is using symbolism or metaphors, it would really ruin the meaning of the Bible to take them literally. All right? So that's just across the board. We're not even talking about flat earth stuff there. We need to understand to read the literature of the Bible in the way that it was written. We don't have to read Revelation like a historical narrative like we might the book of Exodus, but we can certainly read it as apocalyptic. Secondly, we would also say, that we need to, there was my quote from Justin Rogers, I forgot. There's the audience. Take into account who the Bible is written for. The Bible was written for me, I understand that. But I am not the original intended audience, am I? When Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes, did he have me in mind in the midst of my modern world and the discoveries that we have made? And writing for me? No, he was writing for his contemporaries. David was writing for his contemporaries. Matthew is writing for his contemporaries. And so what we see is that the Bible is written to an original audience with different understandings of the creation than our modern world. Israel lived, for example, among flat earth cultures like Egypt, which we know was a flat earth culture. They believed that the earth was flat. Babylon believed the earth was flat. The Assyrians believed the earth was flat. And then in the midst of these great world empires through the ages, here's little Palestine. What do you think they understood about the world without the benefit, we might say, of telescopes and spaceships and rocketry and the things that we have benefited from today? How did they understand their world? Well, number one, it doesn't appear that they were really all that concerned about the cosmology of the earth, the makeup of the earth, or what it looked like. They were more concerned about everyday things. They were not in the great pursuit, we might say, of discovering the secrets of the world. And so what we say is that the Bible uses phenomenological language that simply means that the earth is described in a way that it appears to the hearers. If you're standing here and you look out to the west and you see the mountains, or maybe you go out to the west and you climb one of them and you're looking around at the other mountains in the range, how would you describe the earth? Mountainous? Rocky? Cold? We would describe it in how it appears to us right then and there. And then if we were to move further out west and get to the hated world of Kansas, we would see that it was flat. We wouldn't start talking about mountains and rocks and things like that. We would talk about how flat it is, how far you can see. But even then, as far as we can see with the naked eye, we can't see the curvature of the horizon. And so it appears to be flat. And so the Bible uses this type of language to describe the way it appears to the hearer. We use this language all the time. Everyone lost an hour last night, and the sun rose early. Did it? No. No, the earth rotated. The sun didn't rise. The sun doesn't set. Yet it doesn't stop us from using sunrise and sunset, does it? In other words, we are accommodating for the way the world appears. And certainly they were doing the same thing back then. We might ask the question, what benefit would it be to the original audience if God spoke of the earth and the universe from its complexities of particles and quarks and atoms and electrons and nebulae and galaxies? What would that have meant to them? They hadn't seen any one of them. These terms have not even been made up yet. Does God know they exist? Of course he does. He created all those things. But why start explaining the atom to people that can't even see an atom? In other words, it would be better to deal with them in their needs. And honestly, how many of us have to deal with atoms now? We learned them in high school. I understand that. How many are still dealing with atoms in their jobs? Probably not as many of us as the high school thought we were. And so, that goes back to that question that God asked, were you there? Where were you when I laid the foundations? God is actually challenging Job when he asks that question. Do you really understand the complexities that I understand? And he's not trying to make Job feel dumb. He just wants Job to realize there are things about this universe he does not understand, but that God does. And so God wrote that way. So how do we deal with some misunderstandings? There are many who misunderstand the biblical data. They believe that the Bible teaches the flat earth concept. Many flat earthers believe it, most based on the research of the work by a guy named Sam Robotham in the mid to late 1800s. But they're not the only ones who think the Bible teaches a flat earth. Atheists and evolutionists also like to pin flat earth on the Bible, such as the man by the name of Robert Schadenwald. He says that the biblical cosmology is never explicitly stated, so it must be pieced together from scattered passages. The Bible is a composite work, so there is no a priori reason why the cosmology assumed by its various writers should be relatively consistent, but it is. The Bible is, from Genesis to Revelation, a flat earth book. Well, he likes to say that because to him that's poking fun at people who believe in the Bible. And in a particular article I read of his, he lined up many of the very same passages we were discussing earlier. However, I would simply say that's wishful thinking from both groups. From those who believe in a flat earth, as well as those who want to mock Christianity. Taking the totality of the verses of all the Bible that are used, none of them teach or demand or assume a flat earth. I would say all are consistent with modern science. And that's a bold statement. It doesn't sound bold to us because we believe that, but that's a bold statement to say that all of these verses are still consistent with with modern science. And we say that because the Bible is not a book of cosmology. That means it's not about the universe and the material universe and how things are made up, how things are ordered in the universe. The Bible is not here it's not a astronomy textbook for us. Never meant to be. It is not a book of cosmology. It is a book of theology and anthropology. It is concerned about God and man. Anything that it addresses outside of God and man are incidental support for God and man. Right? We have to understand that. When it's telling us that someone went from the city of Cana in Galilee to the city of Jerusalem, there's geography involved in locating those cities and maybe the terrain and the roads they would walk on, but that's incidental to support the story of anthropology and theology, of God and man. That's all they're there for. And so the so-called flat earth passages must be interpreted not in the light of cosmology, but in the light of theology and anthropology. What are they talking about in reference to God and to man? And so let me just give you some quick explanations for those categories. For example, we talk about the four corners. Simply a literary device used to describe the far reaches of the earth. It corresponds to the directions on a compass, northeast, south, and west. The Bible is not suggesting the earth is flat or that it's square, but simply that God, for example, in Isaiah 11:12 again, is gathering everyone from everywhere. That's all it means. The angels that are harvesting from the four corners, meaning that they're harvesting from all the earth. It's not trying to tell us the shape of the earth. It's simply telling us that God is concerned about everyone, everywhere on the globe, we might say. What about the idea of foundation? This is imagery that is based upon common human practices. Just as humans build a foundation for their homes, God has built a foundation for his creation, the home of all creation, we might say. It isn't about cosmology of how the world is made, but it's one of theology, that God created the universe, and it says nothing about the shape of the earth. You know, when people, well, see here, the Bible says the earth is flat. It's got foundations. Foundations are flat. No, it's simply talking about the surety of the earth that God created. It's not trying to tell us what shape the earth is. Or what about the passages that deal with the immovability? These statements are made several times about the earth, and it's just about giving us assurance from a human perspective of the surety of the earth. It's not concerned about revolutions and rotation of the earth, which is obviously movement. I mean, we could look at astrophysics and say, no, the earth is moving. You know, it's rotating on its axis at about 1,000 miles per hour. That's moving. and then it's hurtling through, you know, around the sun at an even greater speed. And then our solar system is rotating around our spiral galaxy at thousands of miles an hour. And our galaxy is going around the universe. I mean, we are in constant movement. You know, you cannot pick your foot up and set it down and it be in the same place and space from the first moment to the second. It's impossible. We're just moving too quickly. So these verses that talk about the earth is not moving, you know, and we hadn't even got into earthquakes, when the earth moves that way. What God is saying is, look, I have made this sure. You don't have to be concerned about the earth falling to pieces until 2 Peter 3, until God burns it up. The whole Save the Planet movement is born of an atheistic philosophy that says we're the ones in control and we can destroy it before God is ready. And I'm here to tell you we will not. John Nason this morning in class brought up the nukes and everyone shooting off the nukes, and it was a little clumsily stated, but I think his point was that even if every nuclear bomb went off on earth at the same time, God is in control. And this earth will not be destroyed until God chooses. Therefore, it is immovable. What about the vault? The earth is vaulted. It has this firmament. Well, I think the ESV translates it better as expanse. And the idea is that Genesis is simply separating the realms of the universe. The realms we understand and respect today, things like water and land and atmosphere and the vacuum of space and so forth. The presence of space or the expanse is where the celestial bodies abide. And it says nothing about the shape of the earth. It simply is talking about that there's an other realm in which the celestial bodies abide. What about geocentricity? The Bible does not use this term, obviously, but it does describe the celestial movements from a human perspective. It looks like the sun rises and that the planets wander. But these verses are not trying to explain astrophysics. Rather, it is simply describing God's work and humanity's wonderment. And then finally, the visibility. In these passages, the idea of seeing everything is what is in view. It is not intended to suggest that from one spot on the earth, someone can see all the earth. If Matthew 4:8 is speaking literally, how is Jesus, a man, able to see everything on the earth, even from one spot, if the earth is flat? Telescope technology hasn't been invented yet. So we understand that statement to be hyperbolic. Exaggeration, we might say. We use that all the time. The fish I caught was, this big. That's hyperbolic, When we use hyperbole, we're using it for an effect. And in this case, it's, that all was seen. Now, taking into account also that this is a supernatural event, again, the world can still be a globe and Jesus see all things. God can still see all things, even if the world is a globe. He's not, if he's on this side of the earth, it's not like he can't see things on this side of the earth. Number one, God is not just in one place. He's in the whole universe, and so he sees all things. And so this idea of the full visibility is not necessary for the earth to be flat. It would be impossible with the naked eye to see these things. Now, on a side note, I just want to mention Isaiah 40 and verse 22. I've heard this many times. I've used this argument before, that he who sits above the circle of the earth, and the word circle here means spherical in the Hebrew. It doesn't. It means circle. The Hebrew did not have a word for sphere. And I've heard in Christian apologetics, we use this verse to say, see, here very early on, they already knew the earth was shaped like a ball. And that's simply not true. That's not even how this word is being used. It's simply saying that God sits above the entirety of the earth. It's not giving us a cosmological explanation of the shape of the earth. It's giving us that theological explanation that God is over the whole earth. And so, by the way, the flat earthers say it's a circle because it's a circular disc. But even as a believer in what the Bible actually does say, it's not meant to be evidence for us to say, see, look, Christian apologetics, they knew the earth was a sphere before it was ever discovered by anybody else. The word doesn't mean sphere, and that's not the intention of the verse. The intention is simply to describe God being over the whole earth, the whole encompassed universe, we might say. And it's a poetic way of saying that. In fact, Isaiah 40 is in that poetic type genre. So that's how I would explain those verses. And I know I guess that's kind of a lot to digest. I understand that, but all of these verses really fall into those 6 categories. You might be able to make up some other categories as well, but I think those kind of run the gamut of the ones that are used most often. And none of them, whether you're talking, this is what I love, even if you took every one of them literally, not a single one of them talks about the shape of the earth, being flat or otherwise. They just don't mean that. And then when you put them in their context and see how they're being used, they fit. And so I would simply say that the Bible does not address the shape of the earth at all, anywhere. It doesn't need to. That's not what the Bible is about. The Bible is addressing humanity and the needs of salvation. And we might say if the earth were flat, humanity needs salvation. And if the earth were oblong, like the shape of a football or a rugby ball, humanity needs salvation. And since the earth is spherical, humanity still needs salvation. You see, the concerns of the Bible is about our salvation. And it doesn't matter what the shape of the earth is for that. Were there people who were reading the Bible in its original day that thought the earth was flat? I have no doubt there were. But it didn't impact their understanding of salvation. And today, as we understand, because of modern science and so forth, that has been revealed throughout the ages, it doesn't impact what we need to know and understand about salvation. The shape that God created is perfect for sustaining life. The more we learn about the physical qualities of our universe, the more we stand in awe of the intricacies, the precision that it takes for the world to sustain life. How long have we been looking for life on other planets? And the fact is, life does not exist there because it was not created to sustain life like Earth was. Thus, the biblical and scientific data agree in one completely. So don't let people try to browbeat you. You're one of those Christians. You must believe in the flat earth. Nope. The Bible I read doesn't teach it either. But tonight we have an opportunity, not for the cosmology of it, but for the theology and the anthropology, for God and man, to make sure our relationship is right with Him. And tonight, if you are on the wrong side of God's commandments, if you have not yet obeyed the gospel, if you're waiting for something, you've got to ask yourself the question, what am I waiting for? What better day is there than today? What better moment than now to respond to his invitation while we stand and while we sing?